Black fashion designer's new line sparks unexpected debate. The crowd erupted in gasps and shouts. Flashes from cameras lit up the darkened room as models froze on the runway. Eleanor Jackson, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, stood at the end of the catwalk, her normally composed face now etched with shock. Her hands trembled as she gripped the podium. "This is not art, it's exploitation," a voice thundered from the front row. Marcus Winters, the influential critic from Style Quarterly, had risen to his feet, pointing an accusing finger at Eleanor. "You've crossed a line today that cannot be uncrossed." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Security personnel moved toward the commotion, but Eleanor raised her hand to stop them. Her collection, inspired by her grandmother's civil rights-era photographs, was supposed to be her triumphant return to the fashion world at age 67. Instead, it was unraveling before her eyes. "You don't understand what this means," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible above the growing chaos. Her daughter Zoe rushed to her side, protective arm around her mother's shoulders. In the third row, Thomas Bennett, Eleanor's former mentor and now rival, watched with a mixture of concern and something else, something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. The president of the Fashion Council stepped forward, whispering urgently in Eleanor's ear as the models looked to her for direction. One of them, wearing the most controversial piece, a reimagined Freedom Rider's jacket adorned with vintage protest pins and newspaper headlines from 1963, looked close to tears. "Please," Eleanor finally spoke into the microphone, her voice cracking. "Before you judge, you need to know the truth. This isn't what it seems." But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Eleanor Jackson had arrived at the Manhattan Fashion Center, carrying 60 years of dreams and one very precious photo album. Eleanor adjusted her glasses as she stepped out of the taxi on West 38th Street. The Manhattan Fashion Center loomed before her, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun. She clutched her leather portfolio tightly. Inside was not just her new collection sketches, but also the worn photo album that had inspired it all. "Big day, Mom," Zoe said, paying the driver before joining her mother on the sidewalk. At 42, Zoe had her mother's height and determined chin, but her practical business attire contrasted with Eleanor's vibrant emerald dress and architectural jewelry. "Biggest in 20 years, Eleanor replied, patting her silver-streaked hair. "I still can't believe they gave me the closing spot for Fashion Week." Eleanor had been one of the few black women designers to break barriers in the 1980s, creating elegant evening wear that graced red carpets and society events. But after her husband's death in 2005, she had retreated from the spotlight, teaching at a design school and raising her daughter. This collection marked her return, a personal statement that had consumed the past 18 months of her life. As they entered the building, Thomas Bennett was emerging from the elevator. At 72, Thomas was still imposing, tall and distinguished with a full head of white hair and impeccable tailoring. Once Eleanor's mentor when she first entered the industry, he had become a competitor and eventually, after a bitter falling out over credit for a design, something of an adversary. "Eleanor," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I heard rumors you were showing today, but I could hardly believe it." "Hello, Thomas," Eleanor replied coolly. "Yes, closing the week with my new collection, Remembrance." "Ambitious title," Thomas said with a tight smile. "I just finished my run-through. Everything's gone digital these days, hardly recognize the industry we started in with our sketch pads and fabric swatches. Do you remember?" "Some things change," Eleanor said. "Others remain exactly the same." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, I wish you luck. The critics can be unforgiving after so long an absence." He nodded to Zoe and continued toward the exit. "Still as warm as ever," Zoe muttered, watching him leave. "He's probably worried," Eleanor said, pressing the elevator button. "Last time I showed a collection, it overshadowed his." Upstairs, the preparation area buzzed with activity. Models were being fitted, makeup artists worked at lighted stations, and Eleanor's small team of assistants, mostly former students, rushed to make final adjustments to the garments. "Eleanor, there you are." Marcus Winters approached, digital recorder in hand. In his 50s, Marcus had become the most influential fashion critic in the industry, his reviews capable of making or breaking careers. "Any chance of a pre-show exclusive about your comeback?" "Marcus," Eleanor greeted him with a professional smile. "I'd prefer to let the clothes speak for themselves, but you're welcome to wait until after the show for comments." "Always the mystery," Marcus said with a laugh. "I'm looking forward to seeing what's brought you back after all these years." As Marcus walked away, Zoe leaned toward her mother. "You should have given him something. He could help build buzz." Eleanor shook her head. This collection needs to be seen all at once in context. It's not just fashion, it's history, my history. She opened her portfolio and removed the photo album, carefully turning to a black and white photograph of a young woman in a simple dress and cardigan, standing proudly beside a bus. The woman's face, so similar to Eleanor's own, showed both determination and fear. "Grandma looks so young," Zoe said softly. "She was only 19, Eleanor replied, tracing the outline of the woman in the photo. "Just a few years younger than our models today. She kept everything, her clothes, the newspaper clippings, the pins they wore to identify each other. That's what inspired this collection." Eleanor was interrupted by her assistant, Darius, a talented young designer in his own right. "We've got a problem with the finale piece," he said anxiously. "The embroidery on the Freedom Rider jacket is coming loose." "I'll fix it myself," Eleanor said, closing the album. "Some things you need to do with your own hands." Over the next 2 hours, Eleanor worked methodically, checking each garment, making minute adjustments, and coaching the models on how to move in the clothes. These weren't just designs to her. They were stories, each one connected to her grandmother's experiences as a civil rights activist in the 1960s. "The music is all set," Zoe reported, checking things off her list. "They've loaded your selections, Sam Cooke, Nina Simone, and that instrumental piece Dad composed." Eleanor nodded, feeling a pang at the mention of her late husband. James would have been proud of this moment. He had always encouraged her to create fashion with meaning. 10 minutes to first looks," called the stage manager, and the room's energy shifted into high gear. Eleanor gathered her models in a circle. Most were young, in their early 20s, with diverse backgrounds and body types, a deliberate choice that had raised eyebrows among some traditional casting directors. "Remember what we discussed," she told them. "These garments tell the story of brave men and women who risked everything for justice. When you walk, carry their dignity with you." The models nodded, some looking nervous, others excited. The youngest, Amara, who would be wearing the Freedom Rider jacket for the finale, raised her hand. "Ms. Jackson, I read all about your grandmother last night. I just wanted to say it's an honor to wear something that means so much." Eleanor smiled, touched by the young woman's sincerity. "Thank you, Amara. That means everything to me." As the models lined up, Eleanor took her place at the side of the runway where she could watch the show unfold. The lights dimmed, and Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come" began to play, its soulful melody filling the space. The first model emerged onto the runway wearing a modern interpretation of a 1960s church dress, elegant but practical, in crisp white cotton with subtle embroidery depicting broken chains around the hem. The audience murmured appreciatively. One by one, the designs appeared, each one drawing from Eleanor's grandmother's photographs, but reimagined for contemporary wearability. There were structured jackets inspired by protest attire, dresses with newspaper headline prints from historical moments, and accessories that incorporated authentic buttons and pins from the movement. From her vantage point, Eleanor could see Thomas Bennett in the audience, his expression unreadable. Marcus Winters was taking notes furiously, occasionally looking up with raised eyebrows. The response seemed positive, with frequent applause and the constant flashes of cameras. Then came the transition to the second half of the collection, the more provocative pieces that directly referenced specific events from the civil rights era. Eleanor had debated including these, but ultimately decided that sanitizing history would betray her grandmother's legacy. A model walked out in a sleek evening gown with a back panel displaying a stylized interpretation of police dogs and fire hoses, images from Birmingham, 1963. The fabric made the violent images abstract, but still recognizable to anyone familiar with the iconic photographs from that era. The murmuring in the audience changed tone. Eleanor saw Marcus Winters sit up straighter, his expression shifting from appreciation to something more complicated. A few rows back, an older black journalist someone Eleanor recognized but couldn't name nodded slowly, understanding evident on his face. 3 more models presented increasingly direct references to historical injustices, each garment beautiful but unflinching in its inspiration. The audience's reaction was mixed. Some leaned forward with interest, others shifted uncomfortably. Then Amara appeared for the finale in the Freedom Rider jacket, a vintage denim jacket meticulously reconstructed with newspaper headlines, protest pins, and embroidered quotes from civil rights leaders. On the back was an artistic rendering of Eleanor's grandmother's face, surrounded by the words, "For those who could not remain silent." As Amara reached the end of the runway, she paused as rehearsed, turning slowly to display every detail of the jacket. The music faded, and for a moment there was complete silence. Then Marcus Winters stood up. "This is not art, it's exploitation," he shouted, his face flushed with anger. "You've crossed a line today that cannot be uncrossed." The crowd erupted in gasps and confused chatter. Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. This was the moment we witnessed at the beginning, her triumph turning to chaos in an instant. "You don't understand what this means," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible above the growing noise as she moved to the end of the runway. "I understand perfectly," Marcus retorted. "You're commercializing black trauma for fashion, making our pain into a runway spectacle for predominantly white audiences to consume." From the third row, Thomas Bennett watched with a concerned expression that couldn't quite hide a hint of satisfaction at seeing his former protege facing criticism. The president of the Fashion Council stepped forward, whispering urgently in Eleanor's ear as security personnel moved toward Marcus. "We need to pause the show. This is getting out of hand." "No," Eleanor said firmly, finding her voice. "Please, before you judge, you need to know the truth. This isn't what it seems." The room gradually quieted, all eyes on Eleanor as she motioned for Amara to join her. "These aren't just designs," Eleanor said, her voice stronger now. "This is my family's history. The woman on this jacket is my grandmother, Vivian Jackson, who rode the Freedom buses in 1961. She opened the photo album she had brought with her, holding up the photograph for those nearby to see. "I'm not exploiting our history, I'm honoring it, ensuring it isn't forgotten." Eleanor's voice cracked with emotion. "My grandmother kept everything, her clothes, her pins, the newspapers. She wanted us to remember, not just with words in history books, but with tangible things we could touch and feel." Marcus remained standing, but his expression had shifted from anger to uncertainty. "Mr. Winters," Eleanor continued, addressing him directly, "you wrote an article last year lamenting how younger generations are disconnected from civil rights history, that it's becoming abstract to them, distant. That's exactly why I created this collection." A voice spoke up from a few rows back, the older black journalist Eleanor had noticed earlier. "I was wondering if anyone would have the courage to tell these stories through fashion. I covered the movement for the Amsterdam News. These images, they're not exploitation if they're presented with respect and context." Eleanor nodded gratefully toward him. "Each piece comes with historical information. The proceeds will fund scholarships for black students in design and a traveling educational exhibit." From the audience, a young fashion blogger stood up. "But isn't it painful to see these images? To wear them? Isn't that inappropriate?" Amara, still standing beside Eleanor in the Freedom Rider jacket, stepped forward to the microphone. Though she hadn't been scheduled to speak, Eleanor nodded for her to continue. "I'm 22, Amara said, her voice trembling slightly. "Before this show, what I knew about Freedom Riders came from a single paragraph in a textbook. Wearing this jacket, learning about Ms. Jackson's grandmother, I felt connected to that history in a way I never had before. That's not exploitation, that's education." A thoughtful silence fell over the room. Marcus Winters remained standing, but his posture had softened. "I'd like to finish the show," Eleanor said, "and afterward I welcome all of your questions and criticisms. This collection isn't meant to be comfortable, it's meant to start exactly this kind of conversation." After a moment's hesitation, Marcus Winters slowly sat down. He didn't smile or nod, but he was listening. The music resumed, Nina Simone's "I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free," and Amara completed her walk. The traditional designer's bow at the end of the show became something more significant as Eleanor walked the runway with all her models, each one carrying a piece of history. "Your collection is trending online. People are sharing stories about their own family connections to the civil rights movement." Eleanor took the phone, scrolling through images of her designs alongside personal family photographs and stories that people were sharing in response. The conversation was growing, expanding beyond fashion to touch on memory, legacy, and how history lives in the present. Joseph Miller joined them, leaning slightly on his grandson's arm. "Vivian always said fashion wasn't frivolous. It was how we presented ourselves to a world that wanted to diminish us. Style was resistance." The old man smiled at Eleanor. She would have loved seeing her granddaughter carry that forward. 3 months later, Eleanor's collection was displayed at the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham, alongside historical artifacts and newly recorded oral histories inspired by the project. The controversy had transformed into a movement of its own, with fashion schools developing curricula around responsible historical reference and cultural context in design. Marcus Winters's review, ultimately titled "Fashion as Memory," Eleanor Jackson's radical act of remembrance, had sparked industry-wide discussions about meaning and purpose in fashion. And somewhat to Eleanor's ongoing amazement, She and Thomas Bennett were deep in development on a collaborative collection exploring untold stories from their shared 6 decades in the industry. On the day the museum exhibit opened, Eleanor stood beside the Freedom Rider jacket, now displayed alongside her grandmother's original cardigan from the 1961 photograph. Amara, who had decided to pursue fashion design herself and was now Eleanor's intern, adjusted the lighting to highlight the connection between the historical garment and its contemporary interpretation. "Do you think we got it right?" Amara asked, stepping back to assess their work. Eleanor thought about the journey from that chaotic moment on the runway, when it seemed everything was falling apart, to this thoughtful, expansive conversation that continued to grow. "I think we started something important," she replied, "and sometimes that's even better than getting it right the first time." Zoe joined them, clipboard in hand as always. "The first tour group is ready when you are, Mom." Joseph Miller came with his whole family. As Eleanor prepared to guide the first visitors through the exhibit, she touched the vintage photograph of her grandmother one last time. What had begun as a personal tribute had become something larger, a bridge between generations, a conversation across time. She thought of Marcus's initial outrage, of Thomas's competitive resentment, of her own fear that returning to fashion after so many years would end in failure. All of those reactions had been transformed through honest confrontation and genuine listening. "Ready?" Zoe asked. Eleanor nodded, straightening her shoulders. "More than ready, this is just the beginning." Outside the museum, a group of young design students waited eagerly to hear from the woman who had proven that fashion could be more than seasonal trends. It could be a keeper of memory, a teller of necessary stories, a connector of generations. Eleanor Jackson, at 67, wasn't making a comeback. She was moving fashion forward by ensuring its connections to the past remained visible, honored, and understood. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.